Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Diary of Anne Frank. So, yeah, we've had a look at how things are going and how cautious they're having to be. But, yeah, let's jump into this. Sunday, September the 27th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mother and I had a so called discussion today, but the annoying part is that I burst into tears. I can't help it. Daddy is always nice to me, and he also understands me much better. At moments like these, I can't stand Mother. It's obvious that I'm a stranger to her. She doesn't even know what I think about the most ordinary things. We were talking about maids and the fact that you're supposed to refer to them as domestic help these days. She claimed that when the war is over, that's when they'll want to be. That's what they'll want to be called. I didn't quite see it that way. Then she added that I talk about later so often and that I act as if I were such a lady, even though I am not. But I don't think building sandcastles in the air is such a terrible thing to do, as long as you don't take it too seriously. At any rate, Daddy usually comes to my defense. Without him, I wouldn't be able to stick it out here. I don't get along with Margot very well either. Even though our family never has the same kind of outbursts they have upstairs, I find it far from pleasant. Margot's and Mother's personalities are so alien to me. I don't understand my girlfriend's better. I understand my girlfriend's better than my own mother. Isn't that a shame? For the umpteenth time, Mrs. Von Don is sulking. She's very moody and has been removing more and more of her belongings and locking them up. It's too bad Mother doesn't repay every Von Don disappearing act with a Frank disappearing act. Some people, like the Von Dons, seem to take special delight not only in raising their own children but in helping others raise theirs. Margot doesn't need it since she's naturally good, kind, and clever, perfection itself. But I seem to have enough mischief for the two of us. More than once, the air has been filled with the Von Don's admonitions and my saucy replies. Father and Mother always defend me fiercely. Without them, I wouldn't be able to jump back into the fray with my usual composure. They keep telling me I should talk less, mind my own business, and be more modest. But I seem doomed to failure. If Father weren't so patient, I'd have long ago given up hope of ever meeting my parents' quite moderate expectations. If I take a small helping of a vegetable I loathe and eat potatoes instead, the Von Dons, especially Mrs. Von Don, can't get over how spoiled I am. Come on, Anne, eat some more vegetables, she says. No, thank you, ma'am, I reply. The potatoes are more than enough. Vegetables are good for you. Your mother says so, too. Have some more, she insists, until Father intervenes and upholds my right to refuse a dish I don't like. Then Mrs. Von Don really flies off the handle. You should have been at our house where children were brought up the way they should be. I don't call this a proper upbringing. Anne is terribly spoiled. I'd never allow that. If Anne were my daughter, this is always how her tirades begin and end. If Anne were my daughter, thank goodness I'm not. But to get back to the subject of raising children, yesterday a silence fell after Mrs. Von Don finished her little speech. Father then replied, I think Anne is very well brought up. At least she's learned not to respond to your interminable sermons. As far as the vegetables are concerned, all I have to say is look who's calling the kettle black. Mrs. Von Don was soundly defeated. The pot calling the kettle black refers to of course, to Madam herself, since she can't tolerate beans or any kind of cabbage in the evening because they give her gas. But I could say the same. What a dope, don't you think? In any case, let's hope she stops talking about me. It's so funny to see how quickly Mrs. Von Don flushes. I don't, and it secretly annoys her to no end. Yours, Anne. Monday, September the 28th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, I had to stop yesterday, though I was nowhere near finished. I'm dying to tell you about another one of our clashes, but before I do, I'd like to say this. I think it's odd that grown-ups quarrel so easily and so often and about such petty matters. Up to now, I always thought bickering was just something children did and that they outgrew it. Of course, there's sometimes a reason to have a real quarrel, but the verbal exchanges that take place here are just plain bickering. I should be used to the fact that these squabbles are daily occurrences, but I'm not and never will be as long as I'm the subject of nearly every discussion. They refer to them as discussions instead of quarrels. But Germans don't know the difference. They criticize everything, and I mean everything about me. My behavior, my personality, my manners, every inch of me, from head to toe and back again, is the subject of gossip and debate. Harsh words and shouts are constantly being flung at my head, though I'm absolutely not used to it. According to the powers that be, I'm supposed to grin and bear it, but I can't. I have no intention of taking their insults lying down. I'll show them that Anne Frank wasn't born yesterday. They'll sit up and take notice and keep their big mouths shut when I make them see they ought to attend to their own manners instead of mine. How dare they act that way? It's simply barbaric. I've been astonished time and time again at such rudeness and most of all at such stupidity, Mrs. Von Don. But as soon as I've gotten used to the idea, and that shouldn't take long, I'll give them a taste of their own medicine, and then they'll change their tune. Am I really as bad-mannered, headstrong, stubborn, pushy, stupid, lazy, etc., as the Von Dons say I am? No, of course not. I know I have my faults and shortcomings, but they blow them all out of proportion. If you only knew, Kitty, how I seethe when they scold and mock me. It won't take long before I explode with pent-up rage. But enough of that. I've bored you long enough with my quarrels, and yet I can't resist adding a highly interesting dinner conversation. Somehow we landed on the subject of Pym's extreme diffidence. His modesty is a well-known fact which even the stupidest person wouldn't dream of questioning. All of a sudden, Mrs. Von Dahn, who feels the need to bring herself into every conversation, remarked, "I'm very modest and retiring too, much more so than my husband." Have you ever heard anything so ridiculous? This sentence clearly illustrates that she's not exactly what you'd call modest. Mr. Von Dahn, who felt obliged to explain the much more so than my husband, answered calmly, "I have no desire to be modest and retiring. In my experience, you get a lot further by being pushy." And turning to me, he added, "Don't be modest and retiring, Anne. It will get you nowhere." Mother agreed completely with this viewpoint, but as usual, Mrs. Von Dahn had to add her 2 cents. This time, however, instead of addressing me directly, she turned to my parents and said, "You must have a strange outlook on life to be able to say that to Anne. Things were different when I was growing up, though they probably haven't changed much since then, except in your modern household." This was a direct hit at Mother's modern childbearing methods, which she defended on many occasions. Mrs. Von Dahn was so upset, her face turned bright red. People who flush easily become even more agitated when they feel themselves getting hot under the collar, and they quickly lose to their opponents. The non-flushed mother, who now wanted to have the matter over and done with as quickly as possible, paused for a moment to think before she replied. "Well, Mrs. Von Dahn, I agree that it's much better if a person isn't over modest. My husband, Margot, and Peter are all exceptionally modest. Your husband, Anne, and I, though, are not exactly the opposite. Don't let ourselves be pushed around." Mrs. Von Dahn, "Oh, but Mrs. Frank, I don't understand what you mean. Honestly, I'm extremely modest and retiring. How can you say that I'm pushy?" Mother, I didn't say you were pushy, but no one would describe you as having a retiring disposition. Mrs. Von Dahn, I'd like to know in what way I'm pushy. If I didn't look out for myself, no one else would, and I'd soon starve. But that doesn't mean I'm not as modest and retiring as your husband. Mother had no choice but to laugh at this ridiculous self-defense, which irritated Mrs. Von Dahn. Not exactly a born debater, she continued her magnificent account in the mixture of German and Dutch until she got so tangled up in her own words that she finally rose from the chair and was just about to leave the room when her eye fell on me. You should have seen her. As luck would have it, the moment Mrs. Von Dahn turned around, I was shaking my head in a combination of compassion and irony. I wasn't doing it on purpose, but I'd followed her tirade so intently with my reaction was completely involuntary. Mrs. Von Don wheeled around and gave me a tongue lashing. Hard, Germanic, mean and vulgar, exactly like some fat, red-faced fishwife. It was a joy to behold. If I could draw, I'd like to have sketched her as she was then. She struck me as so comical. That silly little scatterbrain. I've learned one thing. You only really get to know a person after a fight. Only then can you judge their true character. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, September the 29th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, the strangest things happen to you when you're in hiding. Try to picture this. Because we don't have a bathtub, we wash ourselves in a wash tub, and because there's only hot water in the office, by which I mean the entire lower floor, the seven of us take turns making the most of this great opportunity. But since none of us are alike and are all plagued by varying degrees of modesty, each member of the family has selected a different place to wash. Peter takes a bath in the office kitchen, even though it has a glass door. Then when it's time for his bath, he goes around to each of us in turn and announces that we shouldn't walk past the kitchen for the next half hour. He considers this measure to be sufficient. Mr. Von Don takes a bath upstairs, figuring that the safety of his own room outweighs the difficulty of having to carry the hot water up all those stairs. Mrs. Von Don has yet to take a bath. She's waiting to see which is the best place. Father bathes in the private office and Mother in the kitchen behind a fire screen, while Margot and I have declared the front office to be our bathing grounds. Since the curtains are drawn on Saturday afternoon, we scrub ourselves in the dark, while the one who isn't in the bath looks out the windows through a chink in the curtains and gazes in wonder at the endlessly amusing people. A week ago, I decided I didn't like this spot and have been on the lookout for more comfortable bathing quarters. It was Peter who gave me the idea of setting my wash tub in the spacious office bathroom. I can sit down, turn on the light, lock the door, pour out the water without anyone's help, and all without the fear of being seen. I used my lovely bathroom for the first time on Sunday, and strange as it may seem, I like it better than any other place. The plumber was at work downstairs on Wednesday moving the water pipes and drains from the office bathroom to the hallway so the pipes won't freeze during the cold winter. The plumber's visit was far from pleasant. Not only were we not allowed to run water during the day, but the bathroom was also off limits. I'll tell you how we handled this problem. You may find it unseemly of me to bring up, but I'm not so prudish about matters of this kind. On the day of our arrival, Father and I improvised a chamber pot, sacrificing a cannon jar for this purpose. For the duration of the plumber's visit, canning jars were put into service during the daytime to hold our calls of nature. As far as I was concerned, this wasn't half as difficult as having to sit still all day and not say a word. You can imagine how hard that was for Miss Quack. 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 And on ordinary days, we have to speak in a whisper. Not being able to talk or move at all is 10 times worse. After 3 days of constant sitting, my backside was stiff and sore. Nightly calisthenics helped. Yours, Anne. But we'll go ahead and end this episode there. Yeah. So, living so close together is clearly already on the nerves of everyone. They're like, when you live almost on top of each other, yeah. It's ridiculous. But, yeah. So, you see the conflicts arise. A lot of irritation and agitation also seems to grow as this continues on and on. So yeah, but yeah, the Van Dons and Franks having to be squeezed into such small areas is making things a little difficult. But yeah. Anyway, like I said, we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.